everyone, welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will be discussing the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So this book is one of a kind, and it is extremely significant and influential. Definitely a must-read. Mr. Frankl wrote this book in 1945 in full. However, he started writing this book before he was placed in concentration camps. So I'm going to tell you a bit about Frankl first, and then I will dive into the book. And the book is really cool because it's not only a story of what he went through, but it's his reasoning and explanation behind what he came up with after, which is a type of psychotherapy called logotherapy. So very, very interesting. So before I begin, if there's anything today that you hear that you like or find interesting, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. So Viktor Frankl, he was born in 1905 in Austria. He got his doctorate in medicine at the age of 25. He began working with suicidal women in a psychiatric clinic, and then at the age of 32, he opened his own practice in neurology and psychology. So he was in a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia for 2 years, and then he was transported to Auschwitz. So his wife was moved to a camp in Germany. They got separated almost immediately, and she died there at the age of 24. And then he was moved to a Bavarian camp. So Frankl's camp was liberated in 1945, and then he found out at that point that his wife, parents, and brother are all dead. They were all murdered. In 1946, he became the director of the Vienna Neurological Polyclinic and stayed there for 25 years. He was passionate, always about helping people find the meaning for their lives. And that came about kind of leading up to World War II and his placement in concentration camps. And as he came out of it, his passion became more clear and more focused. He ended up remarrying in 1947, and he had a daughter. So he gave lectures internationally at different universities, wrote various books, and he became a guest professor at Harvard University. Frankl died in 1997 at the age of 92 from heart failure. So Frankl, it's such an interesting book. Like, just to give you a bit of an overview, it's a Holocaust book. It's a book about the experience he had in a concentration camp, but it's one of the easier ones to read. I say this because he doesn't go into too much detail. He states things very factually. He states it almost from an observer that stepped out of his body and was observing what he experienced. It's a really, I've never read anything quite like it. And almost like he's always observing people and finding things curious and explaining the process of how things work mentally when someone's in a concentration camp. And then he talks about, then the book, at the end, he talks about logotherapy, which is the therapy that he came up with in terms of helping people find the meaning for their lives, which is like the ultimate, what man is searching for. So Viktor Frankl says that life holds a potential meaning under any condition, even the most miserable of conditions. And clearly he speaks from experience. Frankl says that success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. So it has to ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness, he says, must happen, and the same holds for success. So you have to just let it happen by not caring about it. I know, easier said than done, but he says, listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge and ability. So he had the chance, actually, to escape what Hitler had in store for the Jews after Hitler had occupied Austria. So shortly before the U.S. entered World War II, Frankl had received an invitation to come to the American consulate in Vienna to pick up his immigration visa. So he could have left with his wife. His parents were very happy for him because he was allowed to leave Austria at this point. However, there's an interesting reason behind it, but he decided to stay with his parents and let the American visa lapse. And he ended up going to a concentration camp along with his family. So, the whole purpose of his book, he says, is to try to answer this question: how was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? So, he goes into it with that idea. How was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? Frankl talks about the different stages mentally that a prisoner went through in a concentration camp. He talks about at first there's like this disbelief, like this isn't actually going to happen. Like we see people being brought to the gas chambers, but like that's not going to happen to us. Like they're going to stop at some point. And then there's curiosity, like a detached kind of curiosity, watching things happen. Like this is just so bizarre, and like, oh, what's happening over there? And yet people are curious. And then curiosity evolved into surprise and alarm. He promised himself something on his first evening in the concentration camp. He said that he would not run into the wire, so he would not kill himself. He talks about logotherapy kind of throughout the book a bit, and then there's a section at the end of the book, more like thoroughly explaining what it is. But it's a type of psychotherapy, as said. And his experience in the concentration camp kind of served as the existential validation of his theories. And we'll talk a bit more about this after. But prisoners would initially, he says, look away when another prisoner was being beaten. But the prisoner who had passed into the second stage of his psychological reactions did not avert his eyes anymore. By then, his feelings were blunted, and he watched unmoved. The prisoner was insensitive to daily and hourly beatings. He soon surrounded himself with a very necessary protective shield. Frankl talks about how apathy was the main symptom of the second phase, and that it was a necessary mechanism of self-defense. So all efforts and emotions were centered on one task: preserving one's own life. In spite of all the enforced physical and mental primitiveness of the life in a concentration camp, he says, it was possible for spiritual life to deepen. He says that sensitive people who were used to a rich intellectual life may have suffered much pain, but the damage to their inner selves was less. He said that they were able to retreat from their terrible surroundings outside to a life of inner riches and spiritual freedom. He also says that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. Frankl talked about how humor was another kind of way for prisoners to deal with their situation in the camp. So he says that it was another of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. He said that humor can afford an ability to rise above any situation, even if only for a few seconds. So him and his fellow prisoners in the camp would invent dreams about the future, would make jokes, like even for 2 seconds that you laugh about something, it can just do a lot in terms of helping with their fight for self-preservation. He also talked about the disillusionment after liberation from the camp and the reintegration into society. So I'm just going to read a quick passage from the book with respect to the disillusionment Frankl's talking about. So there's the one type where initially there's a disillusionment that this is actually happening, right? That they're in a concentration camp. But he's saying that once they're liberated, the disillusionment was different and much worse, which is hard to believe, right? So he says that when on his return, a man found that in many places he was met with only a shrug of the shoulders and with hackneyed phrases. He tended to become bitter and to ask himself why he had gone through all that he had. When he heard the same phrases nearly everywhere, we didn't know about it, and we too suffered. Then he asked himself, have they really nothing better to say to me? The experience of disillusionment is different. Here it was not one's fellow man, whose superficiality and lack of feeling was so disgusting that one finally felt like creeping into a hole and neither hearing nor seeing human beings anymore, but fate itself, which seemed so cruel. A man who for years had thought he had reached the absolute limit of all possible suffering now found that suffering has no limits, and that he could suffer still more and still more intensely. Yeah, there are really no words when it comes to what the Jewish people experienced during World War II in concentration camps, for those that survived after concentration camps, what they went through then too. There are no words. Then at the end of the book, there's a part on logotherapy, which is really fascinating. So it is Frankl's therapeutic doctrine, and it focuses on the future, essentially. It focuses on the meanings to be fulfilled by the patient in his or her future. The patient is confronted with and reoriented toward the meaning of his or her life. And to make him or her aware of this meaning can contribute much to their ability to overcome their neurosis. Logos is Greek for meaning. So, logotherapy focuses on the meaning, the logos, of human existence, as well as on man's search for such meaning. So, according to logotherapy, this striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. Frankl says that studies and polls have shown that people are searching for a purpose and meaning to their lives. I mean, this is still true today, more than half a century after he wrote this book. Well, 3/4 of a century after he wrote this book. So, man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. So, it can't be done by anybody else. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. So, meaning is the key to mental health and to human flourishing. As a prisoner, he was suddenly forced to assess whether his own life still had any meaning, and he had to assess this more than once. He realized that no matter what happened, he retained the freedom to choose how to respond to his suffering. I thought this was just so interesting because it seems like there is no freedom in a concentration camp, but he's saying, no, they can take everything away from you, but they cannot take away your freedom to choose how you're going to respond to the situation presented to you. To choose the way in which one bears his burden. Everyone has this choice and everyone has this responsibility. So meaning is possible in spite of any suffering. Frankl says that studies and polls have shown that people are searching for a purpose and meaning to their lives. I mean, this is still true today, more than half a century after he wrote this book. Well, 3/4 of a century after he wrote this book. So, man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. So, it can't be done by anybody else. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. So, meaning is the key to mental health and to human flourishing. As a prisoner, he was suddenly forced to assess whether his own life still had any meaning, and he had to assess this more than once. He realized that no matter what happened, he retained the freedom to choose how to respond to his suffering. I thought this was just so interesting because it seems like there is no freedom in a concentration camp, but he's saying, no, they can take everything away from you, but they cannot take away your freedom to choose how you're going to respond to the situation presented to you. To choose the way in which one bears his burden. Everyone has this choice and everyone has this responsibility. So meaning is possible in spite of any suffering. I mean, the fact that Frankl could even go through this experience the way he did and come out of it the way he did is remarkable. Clearly a very remarkable man in many ways. And this quote from the book is another way that he's just remarkable. He says that, I do not forget any good deed done to me, and I do not carry a grudge for a bad one. And he was speaking in direct reference to what had been experienced by himself in the concentration camp. So when a guard showed him any kindness at all, he did not forget it, and he didn't carry a grudge for any of the bad things that were done to him, which, yeah, is kind of mind-blowing. That his own goal was to provoke people into realizing they could and should exercise their capacity for choice to achieve their own goals. So it's just giving them agency. It's giving them the knowledge that, like, it lies with them to find their purpose, to find their meaning, and then to go and do what that is for them. Frankl says that the meaning of his own life was to help others find the meaning of theirs. According to logotherapy, we can discover meaning in life in 3 ways. 1, by creating a work or doing a deed. 2, by experiencing something, so whether it's goodness, truth, beauty, nature, culture, or encountering someone. And 3, by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. So he says that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And he says that you can't change your fate or the situation at hand sometimes, but you can always choose your attitude. And I'm just going to read one very quick passage to end off this book, because I think that it really ties in like logotherapy and his experience. He says that we have come to know man as he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright, with the Lord's Prayer or the Shema Yisrael on his lips. So there's so much in this book. It is so significant. I highly, highly recommend it and encourage you to read it. And logotherapy, there's a lot in there that's similar to cognitive behavioral therapy and other type of psychotherapy. So I did a book review on CBT as well on my channel. So I just find this type of psychotherapy very interesting. And obviously Frankl has helped like thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, I'm sure. There have been so many copies of his book bought and read over the decades. So I'm going to leave it there. If there's anything that I've said today that you find interesting or that you've liked, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And like I said, I encourage you to pick up a copy of this incredible book. Thank you for listening. Until next time.